Hi everyone. Today we're going to be going over how to perform a Bulletin 17C flood frequency analysis in HEC-SSP. So if you don't already have HEC-SSP downloaded, you can find it on the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers website. And so here's the website. If you navigate to software, it has all of the HEC softwares, and you can just navigate to HEC-SSP and click the download button. So once you have HEC-SSP downloaded and open, first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new study. So if I go up to the top ribbon and I click on File, New Study, I can go ahead and give my study a name. So I'm just going to call it Johns Creek. I can also give it a description by clicking these ellipses here, but I'm going to omit that part. And then directory, you want to make sure that you save it in a place that you're going to remember so that you can open your file later. The unit system is English, and the coordinate system we can keep as geographic. I'm going to go ahead and press OK. And then what I'm greeted with first is a base map. And then on the left side here is basically the hub of all of our different information. So we have our analyses. Obviously, we see there are a bunch of different analysis types. And then we have our data. So the first thing we're going to do for our flood frequency Bulletin 17C analysis is import data from the USGS website. So I first have to create a data sort of object. So if I click the data folder and I right click and press new, I can go ahead and give my data a name. So I'm just going to call it flood frequency data. I can give it a description again if I'd like, but I'm going to skip that step. I'm going to make sure that my data type is time series, and I'm going to make sure that I'm pulling from the USGS website. So this is going to automatically import the data that we need. We won't have to sort of go to the USGS website and manually import to like a text file or an Excel file. It'll just automatically do it for us through the software. So in this USGS website section, we're going to pick the annual peak data type, since that is the data that we are using for our flood frequency analysis, but different types of analyses need different types of data. So you have all of these different data types, and every single time that you're going to use a new data type, you need to create a new data set. We're going to retrieve data for flow, and then we're going to click this Get USGS Station IDs by State. We're going to navigate to Virginia, press OK, and then it's going to tell us that it has retrieved 619 gauge locations. All right. So now I get to go ahead and search up the basin's name. So we know it's called Johns Creek, and it'll immediately give me the station that I need. So I'm going to go to this import data column and press the plus button. And then I'm going to go back up to location, and I'm going to import to study DSS file. All right, and it's telling me that 1 out of 1 stations have been retrieved, so I'm going to go ahead and press OK. And then as we can see, it's pulled up our flow data set and also the code data set for the peak flow. And it's also populated our base map with our gauge location. So now that we have our data imported, I'm going to go ahead and press save. And then I'm going to go ahead and create a new Bulletin 17 analysis. So right under this analysis tab, it's the first one. We're going to press Bulletin 17 analysis, right click, and create new, just like we added the data in. So the first thing you see is it's telling me to enter a valid name and data set, so I'll go ahead and do that. I will call this flood frequency analysis. Frequency analysis. I can obviously, again, give it a description if I'd like. The flow data set, it's only going to give me one option, but if you had multiple data sets, you would have to figure out which data set you're going to use. Obviously, we're using annual peak since this is a flood frequency analysis. And then we have all these different tabs here where we can either view information or change information. So I'm going to go sort of sequentially through. The first tab, the general tab, is essentially where you choose between doing a 17C and a 17B analysis. Now, if you read the user manual, it'll give you a lot more detail on what the difference between these two are. But the way I like to think about it is that 17C is just 17B sort of upgraded, and it's using this expected moments algorithm. And so each of these methods is its own procedure. And so it has its own set of different ways that it calculates the low outliers and the plotting position. So I can see that if I click 17B, for example, that it changes me from multiple Grubbs-Beck to single Grubbs-Beck for my low outlier test. It actually has a different plotting position computation. It switches from this Hirsch-Stedinger to median. And so I actually don't need to change anything else besides the 17C or 17B designation on this tab, because the 17C designation obviously comes with the rest of these. They're all part of the same sort of procedure. So I can just click 17C and move over to the Options tab. Now, the three sort of things that we can change here is the low outlier threshold. We can add historic period data if it's a 17B analysis. And then we also want our output frequency ordinance. So the low outlier threshold, we are just going to keep this as the multiple Grubbs-Beck. If you wanted to override it and just have a flat threshold that you determine and not the Grubbs-Beck test, you can, of course, check that and add a value in here, but we're going to keep it unchecked. As I mentioned before, historic period data is only used for 17B procedure, so we can actually skip that step. But if you were using the 17B, basically what you would put here is if you had any sort of flood data that was outside of the period of record, but say it was like a really high flood and you wanted to add it to your data set, then you could click this button here and add the information that you need. And then for output frequency ordinance, we want to make sure to check this use values from table below. And this is actually where you can change these values if maybe you wanted a specific return period calculated, or a specific frequency, or a specific increment of frequencies that you wanted calculated for your curve. This EMA data, we don't really have to change anything in here. Just know that this is sort of the raw data and some of the intermediate data that's being calculated in the 17C procedure. And then tabular results. So obviously this is where all of your results are going to populate once you run the analysis. So I'm going to go down to the bottom and I'm going to click compute, because I know that I've changed all the options that I need to change and I'm ready to see what my results are. So I click compute and it gives me this message that it has computed. And then as I can see in this top table here, it has populated basically everything that it's going to plot on my flood frequency plot. So it's not going to plot this variance log, but it's going to plot obviously my computed curve, my independent variable, which is my percent chance exceedance, and then my confidence limits as well. And also if I needed to see some of the summary statistics, or maybe how many outliers I had, these tables down here will also tell you those values as well. So now I want to output some data. So I can output data in graphical form and tabular form. So I'm going to start with graphical. So if I wanted to plot my flood frequency graph, I would just go down here next to compute and press plot curve. And then it shows me this Bulletin 17 plot. As you can see, it's got our plotting positions on there. There's our computed curve and our confidence limits. And it also has a different data or a different marker type for our low outliers and our actual data. So if we go up to File, up in the top ribbon again, we can either save this maybe as like a PNG file, or we can just print it to PDF. And that's how I would go ahead and output my flood frequency curve. You can also output just tabular data. So if I go to View Report, I feel like this is the best way to output your data, because you're also outputting all of this input data here. So we can see what the actual data set is. We can see what sort of algorithms were being used. And it has all of these intermediate tables as well. So as you can see, for example, we have our plotting position table included, where it has the different rankings of all of our flows. And so if we wanted to go ahead and print this again, we would go up to the top ribbon, press File. We could save it as maybe a text file or something else, but I just want to print to PDF, so I would just click Print and follow how to print from there. So this is pretty much the end of our analysis. Once you've got your outputs, your plot curve, and your report, that's all you would need for the assignment for this section of the course. So just a note for future tutorials, we're actually going to be using this same exact study as we move through the subsequent tutorials, because I can just add different analyses and different data sets to any HEC-SSP study. So we're going to move forward in the next tutorial with doing a low flow analysis in HEC